This is a scandal that defies belief. Over more than 2 decades, as many as 750,000 women around the world, thousands of them in Australia, were convinced by their doctors to use a contraceptive device called Essure. They were assured the tiny implant was safe. Turns out it wasn't. But when large numbers of the women started complaining it was damaging their bodies and causing them excruciating pain, they were either ignored or told they were imagining it. It was a humiliating insult. So now, hundreds of the Australian women are suing, and they've got some famous clout on their side. Erin Brockovich.
It's been a very terrible, traumatic experience that I don't wish on any woman.
You don't tell anybody, you don't talk to anybody about it.
Until today, these women were total strangers. But they feel like they've known each other for decades.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because for all that time, they've been living the same nightmare. They say brought on by a contraceptive device called Essure that destroyed them.
I just couldn't stop crying. I couldn't believe that a device like this would be put into a female, and it was TGA approved.
The Essure permanent birth control.
They believed this tiny implant would be a painless and permanent way to block their fallopian tubes.
It's the biggest breakthrough for women for over 30 years.
Until it failed them catastrophically.
After the first year, I fell pregnant. The pain was excruciating.
And left them in crushing battles against their own doctors just to be taken seriously.
Basically told it was in my head and that women are mindless sheep who don't know what's wrong with their bodies. Honestly, I wouldn't be alive today. I wouldn't be here. That's how sick I got.
The very first Essure procedure was performed right here in Adelaide back in 1997 by an Australian doctor. The late Professor John Kerrin spent years developing the device with Californian company Conceptus and believed it would revolutionise women's health. But 25 years later, tens of thousands of women around the world wish the device had never been invented. They say the quick and easy procedure they signed up for has instead turned into a lifetime of medical problems.
You feel like you're going to die. Like you feel like you're dying from the inside out. If I ever had the chance to go back and do it again, I would have never gone and done it, if I knew now, ever.
After the birth of her third child in 2008, Simone Burford and her husband decided their family was complete. She asked her doctor to tie her tubes, but instead was convinced to take up a new non-surgical option for permanent contraception called Essure.
It was marketed as a quick fix, no downtime, painless, no side effects.
A tiny metal coil inserted into each fallopian tube was supposed to generate enough scar tissue to close the tube and stop sperm from reaching an egg. The device had been approved by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, the TGA, in 1999, following clinical trials that initially looked at whether it did prevent pregnancy. But appallingly, those early trials didn't focus on other potential harms. So it was marketed to you as this swift and painless procedure.
Yeah.
Was it?
No, anything but. Anything but. It was probably the most painful experience I've had, including childbirth.
Simone's pain was instant and continued around the clock for years, bringing with it countless other debilitating symptoms.
I started having nausea, vomiting. I had metal taste in my mouth. One side of my face went numb. My hair started falling out in clumps. I would come out in a rash on my hands and my feet that was like a contact dermatitis. It was blisters.
Back then, Simone's boys were young and she was desperate for help to ease her pain. But it seemed impossible to find. What did your doctor say was happening to you?
They ran tests and tests all came back fine.
Despite losing your hair,
Yep,
your stomach bloating,
yep,
everything was fine according to them.
yep. Passing, blood clots the size of golf balls. Continual periods that didn't stop. And when I did go back to the surgeon that put the device in, and I said, this device is causing me problems, I need you to take it out. And he turned around and said, it's not the device.
So they didn't believe you?
No doctor believed me. He said it was in my head and referred me to mental health.
It's almost the worst part, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And that affects also your family and your ability to be a good mum, a good wife, a worker, because they're hearing that everything's fine. So they start to think, is there something wrong with you? The devices are inserted in my
It took 6 years for Simone to finally find a doctor willing to remove her fallopian tubes and the Essure devices embedded inside them, leading to a terrible discovery.
During that procedure is when she found that the device indeed was actually broken.
But even with her tubes gone, Simone continued to suffer, leaving her with no option but to have a hysterectomy 2 years later at just 36.
My pathology report, it does say bulky uterus. That's the words that my doctor used when I seen her in recovery, that, had a uterus of a 70-year-old.
Had she seen anything like it before?
No. It was very abnormal for someone my age. I'm still dealing with the effects, of it now. I still have days where, I can't get out of bed.
So you've effectively been robbed of 15 years of your life?
Yeah.
To date?
Exactly, and still counting.
I just thought, oh my God, what have they put inside me?
Like Simone, Sue Bettens thought choosing Essure over having her tubes tied would be quicker and less painful.
Yeah, that was the big selling point for me.
But instead, she says the device caused so much damage that 9 years later, she still hasn't recovered.
I've had dozens and dozens of procedures and it hasn't stopped.
6 weeks after Sue's Essure procedure, she went back to her doctor in constant pain. It was then she realised she wasn't alone.
And then he said to me, you'll be fine, don't get caught up in the media hype.
The media hype of what?
Correct. When he said that, I had a horrible feeling and anxiety. I went home and Googled and I was blown away. Article after article was all these issues coming up with women all through the United States and Canada and parts of Europe, and I was in a bit of shock.
For 2 years, doctors told Sue her symptoms were all in her head, until finally one uncovered shocking proof Essure was to blame.
I had to push to have exploratory surgery, and it was then that they found that my fallopian tube was perforated and had been like that the entire time.
Sue discovered the devices can't easily be extracted without causing further damage or leaving some of the coil behind. So in the end, a hysterectomy was her only option. Was it a relief once it had been performed?
It was a relief because I was no longer in constant pain. The swelling around my abdomen had gone down. I was no longer bleeding for 21 days at a time. But there's also a loss. There's a trauma that you're going through. No one wants to have to keep going through surgeries all the time to correct something that probably shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Pharmaceutical giant Bayer stopped selling Essure in 2017. At that time, more than 16,000 complaints had already been made to regulators in America and Australia combined. And that number has more than quadrupled since then. But the company still refuses to acknowledge there's anything wrong with its product, insisting it stopped selling Essure for business, not safety reasons. Why was it important to you to reach out to these women who had the Essure device?
because our hospital put the Essure devices in.
So you felt a responsibility to these women to help them?
Yeah.
The Gold Coast University Hospital is one of dozens around Australia that offered Essure procedures. Dr. Graham Walker never inserted one himself, but he's now leading the way in repairing the damage. Even though there was no formal recall by Bayer or the TGA, Dr. Walker called in every patient who received implants here. Sadly, 20 women needed hysterectomies to have the devices removed.
You could pick basically any symptom you wish: chronic pelvic pain, heavy periods, mood swings, headaches. You had women who stated quite clearly that their life had been ruined. And we said, right, ultrasound, theatre, hysterectomy. Then they would become better in later life. 24 hours of IV antibiotics.
Not all gynecologists have been as proactive as Dr. Walker. And shockingly, there's no national register of patients who can be tracked down and checked for symptoms. As you'll see, it begs the question, how many more women could still be suffering in silence?
We see this device as a ticking time bomb. This is another example of women's bodies used as guinea pigs. This case is incredibly important to me because of the women. Their stories are really harrowing and really emotional.
And what was their response when you presented to them?
Chatting to her clients, Kylie Trounston feels more like a friend than a class action lawyer.
Oh, that sounds awful. I'm so sorry you had to go through that.
She's fighting for hundreds of Australian women who say they've lost years of their lives because of a dangerous contraceptive device called Essure.
Oh, gosh.
As a mother herself, Kylie feels their pain deeply.
I hope that this class action will ensure that companies in the future are much more careful so that my daughter is not marketed a product that is unsafe and defective and could cause permanent serious injuries.
How many more affected women do you think could potentially be out there?
We think the device was placed in around 7,000 women, so we see this device as a ticking time bomb. You could say this is another example of women's bodies used as guinea pigs, in a way, with a poorly developed and designed and inadequately tested product.
Kylie Trounston has spent years collecting evidence from women with horrendous side effects from Essure. The tiny metal coils were designed to block the fallopian tubes and stop sperm from reaching an egg. For the women Kylie is representing, it also caused lifelong damage.
I got sick instantly.
I couldn't cope with the pain, and it was a years I missed out with my kids. It's your mental health that really suffers.
For so long, so many women have suffered and suffered badly. This is finally their chance at justice. It's a huge responsibility.
It is a huge responsibility, but it's actually a great honour to work for these women. It's a big fight, but we're used to big fights.
Who's working on the modelling?
Kylie and her small team are up against a group of companies, including the multinational that manufactured Essure, Bayer. They show no signs of backing down here in Australia, even though in America they've already reached a $2.5 billion settlement with 39,000 women. That deal came with some astonishing conditions. Bayer made no admissions of wrongdoing, while the women were gagged from ever speaking out about the device. There's been no apology by Bayer?
No, we don't understand why Bayer have settled 90% of the litigation. We ask, why not Australian women? Why are you pushing Australian women to trial to have to be interrogated about their stories when they've settled in the US? It's the same device, it's the same anatomy. Why should Australian women be treated differently?
We asked Bayer for an interview, along with the Therapeutic Goods Administration and the two federal ministers responsible for health. But no one wanted to talk about Essure. The best the $80 billion company and the Australian regulator could do was issue statements. After all they've been through, it's no wonder the women, feel ignored. What does this tell us about the way women's health is dealt with?
We're not heard. It feels deeply at a female level extraordinarily dismissive of their voices.
Erin, why are you so passionate about helping the underdog?
Because I always was the underdog.
More than 20 years after her moment in the Hollywood spotlight, Erin Brockovich is just as passionate about defending the voiceless.
They haven't found their voice yet.
She's become an advocate for tens of thousands of Essure victims in America, including some who fell pregnant, even though the device was supposed to provide permanent contraception. Erin believes Bayer and regulators should have done more stringent testing to understand the risks before Essure was given to so many women.
It failed from its inception. We do things ass backwards, if I'm allowed to say that on 60 Minutes, ass backwards, but we do when you need to have this information on the upfront.
What would justice look like for these women?
The justice would be that this never happened. Justice doesn't come because there's a payday, because they're still left to suffer physically the rest of their lives. And it's really disturbing to me that we have to go to such lengths to get the right thing done for our health and welfare. So, game on.
I need resolution, and so do all the other women who have been affected by this.
For all that Essure has cost women like Sue Bettens, they haven't lost their will to fight against one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. What makes you think you can do it, you and a band of women?
Because the evidence is there. It's not in our heads as we were told.
You want Bayer to know that they can no longer ignore you?
Yes. There needs to be accountability, right? If we don't speak up and say something, these kind of things are going to continue.
Hello, I'm Sarah Abo. Thanks for watching 60 Minutes Australia. Subscribe to our channel now for brand new stories and exclusive clips every week. And don't miss out on our Extra Minutes segments and full episodes of 60 Minutes on 9now.com.au and the 9Now app.